Today we're going to look at an awesome Aztec Bronze 1966 Chevrolet Caprice that's powered by a 427 cubic inch, 390 horsepower V8 engine under hood. The top engine available with an automatic transmission for 1966. But let's take a look at the outside first and describe a little bit about the history of this 1966 Caprice. Now, 1966 was a very special year because this was the first full model year of the Caprice. It was introduced partway through the 1965 model year as a trim option just on four-door vehicles. So 1966 represented the first time that you could get a two-door Caprice. And I guess to celebrate the two-door Caprice, for whatever reason, Chevrolet designers thought that they had to give the Caprice a different roofline than the typical fastback roofline that the Impala had. And you'll note the formal style C-pillar, very upright C-pillar here on the Caprice Coupe. And compare that to the inset, which is an Impala fastback, and they look obviously very, very different. And there's also some bit of humor in this over a period of time. And what do I mean by that? Well, the introduction of the Ford LTD was really what spurred Chevrolet to introduce the Caprice and the success that Ford had with the LTD. Now, when Chevrolet came out with the Caprice Coupe in 1966, as I mentioned, they had this unique roofline for the Caprice. Well, in 1968, Ford would give its LTD a unique roofline different from the fastback profile that it had in 1967, and that fastback profile would continue on the Mercury cars for 1968, but the LTD and the LTD alone got a more vertical style C-pillar. So Chevy kind of copied Ford, the Caprice kind of copied the LTD, and then the LTD copied the Caprice by getting its own unique roofline for the 1968 model year. Now, another little bit of trivia here, and that is that this 66 Caprice was the second year of Chevrolet that came out that was designed by a new design leader for Chevrolet, Irv Verbicki, who took over for Claire McKeegan in 1962 or after the 1964 model year cars were developed. And if you look at the 1964 Chevrolet, you know it's got this kind of flat front end, looks like it ran into a wall. And when Irv Verbicki came along, he wanted Chevrolet to go more upmarket in terms of its looks. And so you get this trapped hood design here as opposed to the hood that kind of extended all the way to the front on the 1964 Chevrolets. And you get the egg crate style texture grille and more fine detailing under Irv Verbicki than you did under Claire McKeegan. And as we rotate around to the side view, we can see that vertical C-pillar that is really visually evident in this particular view. Quite a large rear quarter glass. It's not an overly chunky C-pillar. I'm surprised that the C-pillar isn't a little bit fatter, to be honest. It looks a bit insubstantial to my eye, but hey, what do I know? I'm not a designer. Then you have this full-length crease that runs from the front of the car all the way to the rear, giving it some dimension to the body side, which is otherwise, I would say relatively simple. And I wonder if Ford, again, was inspired by that full-length crease when they were designing their 1968 LTD, which has a very similar feature to it. Although that 68 LTD doesn't have that surface that starts underneath the rear quarter glass and then forms the top of the quarter panel, kind of rises gently before cresting downward again toward the rear of the car. Now, Caprices tended to have that look of, let's say, expensive features and detailing, and that was the entire intent, was to make this car look more expensive than it was. I talked about the egg crate texture grille up front, which was a typical Cadillac cue. You have another kind of typical Cadillac cue here in the Squircle style wheel arches. That was something that Cadillac had for a number of years and had on many cars except Seville's. As we rotate around to the rear three-quarter view of the car, this is a very pretty angle, I think, on this vehicle because you get that visual of the surface that starts underneath the rear quarter window and then gently rises and kind of crests downward as it comes to the rear of the car. You also can see underneath the backlight, you have these fake extractor vents, if you will. This is a little bit of a tired motif, I think, that GM had on cars like the 63 through 5 Riviera. And maybe Chevrolet designers thought it was an upscale design cue, but it was fake, just like it was back on the 1958 Impala when it was overhead. So that one isn't necessarily my favorite. But again, you get this view of that full length feature line on the car, very similar to what, like I said, the 68 LTD would have. The one area where I don't think this car is overly strong is that the rear looks like it kind of backed into a wall. It's just very flat. There's no plan view to it, doesn't have much dimension, and I wish they had done a little bit more with it. But I do think that the graphics on the rear are rather handsome. The taillights look very jewel-like. The bumper looks substantial, but yet not overly large. And the designers clearly thought about load height here because the deck lid has a cut in it that is rather low, allowing for a helpful liftover height for your groceries and other elements. And as we complete our view of the exterior on the passenger side, rear three-quarter view here, again, the lighting is great to just see that surface that makes the top of the rear quarter panel. And you can also tell this is a pretty, I would say, simply styled car. There's not a lot of surfacing on the sides or the deck lid. Look at how simple the deck lid is. There's really not even a crease, so to speak, of in it. It just is kind of there and then folded over to mate with the bumper. So a very simple and elegant and, let's say, cleanly styled vehicle. And, well, it was successful. So I guess that's what matters in the end. Now let's turn to the interior, because this is where I think this car really shines. You have to pinch yourself and remind yourself that this is really a Chevrolet, because the detailing here and the overall design, I think, are just excellent. Look at how beautiful that tilt telescoping wheel is. You would twist the center of that with the Chevrolet emblem, and it would telescope in and out, and you could see the lever for the tilt control there on the side. This car has lots of options outside of just the engine. It does have power windows. The crank there is for the vent windows. Obviously, automatic transmission. You can't tell from here, but it does have power brakes. Has the optional tachometer, too, which is to the right of the speedometer. The left has the fuel gauge. But take a look at the overall theme here and the instrument panel. And yes, that's fake wood over there on the glove box door on the right. But, wow, it just looks rich and expensive. Even the steering wheel itself, while it doesn't have lucite or anything translucent or fancy, those little fine metal details make this look especially rich. And the center console, I think, is just a piece of art, as well as the shifter. It just doesn't get any better than this for a Chevrolet. Absolutely stunning. And as we look at the center console detail here, you can see, first of all, the tachometer there in the position I mentioned, obviously the radio to the right of it. This car does have the optional Comfortron air conditioning, which automatic climate control was actually introduced first by Cadillac in 1964. They had a one-year exclusive before it would start proliferating to other General Motors divisions, and obviously the buyer here opted for it in this particular Caprice. And it was fully automatic climate control. You would set the dial temperature, and then it would select the fan speed, the outlet door, and the outlet temperature. Now, underneath that, you have the gauge pod with the 4 gauges and the clock. I should say 3 gauges and a clock. I don't know how useful it was. It's clearly out of the driver's sight line, but it certainly looks good. I think that's really what the designers were going for, and who cares? It looks absolutely beautiful in this interior. And what I love about this car is that designers even spend time with the detailing on the seats. Look at how beautiful that seat stitch pattern is, the double stitch there every inch or inch and a half or so with the buttons. And the center console detailing looks beautiful. This car does have the optional stereo radio, and you can see those 4 knobs there that are various controls for that. So that was an optional feature too. Very loaded car overall, and I love that it has this dipped interior, so-called dipped interior, meaning it's the same color as the exterior. If this car didn't have that white vinyl roof, I think it'd be even more special, because the whole thing would just be Aztec Bronze. But vinyl roofs were in vogue during this time frame, so it is what it is. And here's where we arguably get to the best part about this 1966 Caprice, and that is what's under hood. This was the top engine that you could get with an automatic transmission, the 427 cubic inch big block, making 390 horsepower. Now, there was a 425 horsepower 427, but you could only get that with a 4-speed manual transmission. You could not get the turbo-hydromatic behind that, and that was the same in the Corvettes. Both of these 427s were rated at the same horsepower in the Caprice as they were in the Corvette. And You can imagine this is immensely powerful. Now, this is a California car, hence the air pump that you see in the middle there. But the 427 was the top engine, and the Caprice engine started at the 283 cubic inch. There are a pair of 283 cubic inch V8s. The lower one made, I believe, 195 horsepower. Then there's a 220 horsepower 283. Then there was a 275 horsepower 327, a 325 horsepower 396, and then these two 427 cubic inch engines atop of the powertrain list. Again, one making 390 horsepower and the top one making 425 horsepower. And in order to get this engine, you had to pay $316 on top of your Caprice's base price. Figure that's about $2,500 to $3,000 of extra cost. So it wasn't exactly cheap, but you got a great performer under hood, relatively speaking, for 1966 that would scare at least some muscle cars. I do love, if you look on the driver's side fender well there, you see the windshield washer bottle. That was how big windshield washer bottles were back in the day. You're not going to get too many squirts on the windshield on a salty day with that. But now it's almost like these things, the washer fluid jugs take a gallon of fluid. Back then, that was all that you had. And of course, you can see the big GM A6 style air conditioning compressor on the passenger side of the engine compartment there that would keep you cool on a hot summer's day as you were driving along in your 390 horsepower Caprice. And before we close out, we'll take a look at the window sticker on this car because, well, it's got a heck of a lot of options. You notice the base price there is $3,000 before the destination charge. And then the most expensive options are, of course, the turbo-hydromatic automatic transmission, the Astro bucket seats that we just saw that were finished in that Aztec Bronze color. You have the AM/FM radio, as well as the four-season air conditioning, which cost $356. It was basically the same price as that 427 cubic inch engine underhood. And stereo speakers were even $105. And the last line item there, you see GM air injection reactor. That was what I was mentioning because this car was a California car. And this window sticker just wraps all the way around the vehicle. Notice the final sales price is $54.37. That includes $316 for the V8, as well as the Positraction rear axle, which somebody got a lazy rear end in this, 273 rear. So you got the super powerful engine, but you could cruise on the freeway and go, well, as fast as your heart would desire, basically. I'm sure this car could top 120, 125 miles an hour. And that $54.37 final selling price is basically equivalent to about $45,000-ish today. So this was an expensive Chevrolet that someone likely custom ordered. I can't imagine that the dealer would just order this for a dealer stock unit unless it was for the dealer principal or someone in his or her family. So what do you think of this beautiful 1966 Caprice? What do you think of the roofline in particular? Do you think that was money well spent from a Chevrolet perspective to try to differentiate the Caprice from the Impala fastback coupe, or do you prefer the fastback roofline? Candidly, I think I prefer the fastback roofline of the Impala versus the Caprice. But I do love this particular Caprice in Aztec Bronze with that Aztec Bronze bucket seat interior and, of course, the wonderful 427 cubic inch, 390 horsepower engine under hood with icy cold air conditioning and a lazy 273-1 rear end. Put a comment in the comment section about your thoughts. Thanks again for watching.